Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Read Across America mini webinar series from the University of Arizona Global Campus Engagement Committee. I would like to welcome all of you here today for our final session in the series. Please remember that our webinar series will be housed on our Open Ed resources page. You will find a special section there for Read Across America, and I'll share that link in the chat in just a few minutes as well. Each day will feature one guest speaker, followed by a short presentation from our guest librarian, Sally Nye, who will also share some new and exciting resources and books that you can check out as we celebrate literacy this week. Today's library focus will be on resources and books for older students. Our presenter today is Keanna Allert, and Keanna is the director of Lindamood-Bells Memphis Learning Center. Ms. Allert has over 15 years of experience working with children to help them improve their language and literacy. Keanna will be sharing ways to explore imagery-language foundation for reading and language comprehension. She will highlight evidence-based practice to support students' learning needs. This session today is supported by key research and over 35 years of instructional expertise. So again, this is Keanna Allert, director of Lindamood-Bells, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that she can share her presentation with you.
Yes. Oh, sorry. And so one of the things we want students to be able to do is not try to sound out was or said or what, or even words like enough or people, where there's some unvoiced sounds. We want that instant word recognition, because if they can see it just like it is spelled and read it accurately, that's how we can start to improve our language circle, which is that reading on the page. So how do these two work together? If I say the word cat, I can sound out k, at, cat. I have three sounds. The first sound is a k. That could be a C or a K, but it's your visual circle that lets you know it's going to be a C every time. And that's what we want students to know as well. So in reading, when you are reading across the page and you come to a word you don't know, we want you to sound it out using that auditory processing, but then we want you to store it for later. And that's that visual processing. So if I'm reading the big gray ELE walked across the jungle, and I need to sound like elephant, I want to hold on to elephant when I get further down the page. The elephant takes a drink from the water hole. And that's what we're looking for when we're thinking about reading circles. And so those inner circles have to depend on that phonological processing and symbol imagery, because they work together for students to recognize words and be accurate on the page. But the challenge is, why do we read at all? And that's how we finish this Venn diagram. We read for meaning. We listen to words for meaning. And hopefully you're getting some meaning from what I'm saying right now. So the process is, as oral or written language comes in, we want students to be able to see what's happening in their mind's eye, because that's the best way for them to recall details, talk about what they read, or even eventually answer questions, recall as well as higher order thinking questions, or even write about it. And so that's what our programs try to build for different students. So just to recap, so 3 sensory cognitive functions that we focus on is that phoneme awareness. So as I shared before, that ability to perceive, identify the number of sounds and that sequence of sounds and individual sounds. Symbol imagery, just that ability to create mental representations of the sounds and letters within words. So what that looks like is, we don't want students sounding out every word, but we want them to be able to picture a word quickly. So if you're my student and I say the word gift, what letter do you see second? You can put your answer in the chat. So if I say gift and I say, what letter do you see second? So you're going to picture that I. Now, what if I erase the I and put an A instead? What will our word say now? Gaffed. And that ability to change those letters quickly and not rely on sounds is one of the things that lets students develop that orthographic processing. They see the word just like it's spelled, and they're able to recognize it quickly. The last one, concept imagery, is that ability to create that image gestalt so you can picture it from oral or written language. So you're going to be my student again. So if I say, what do you see for a dolphin? This is concept imagery. If your picture is like mine, you're probably picturing a gray dolphin with some triangle friends, making some squeaking sounds, jumping up in the water or over the waves. Are you picturing your dolphin in an aquarium, or are you picturing it in the ocean? And that's where we differ in kind of how we facilitate imagery. We go to kind of static, and then we change it based on the context of where we see that dolphin. Because if we say that dolphins like to play in the waves as the ships pass by, we're going to picture it at the front of the bow of the ship. Or if we're picturing dolphins are trained to do tricks at the aquarium, now you're going to be picturing your dolphin in that tank with the trainer catching fish out of the air. And that's how concept imagery works. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So just to recap, the two types of imagery that we think about are parts and wholes. And we're calling that symbol imagery parts because it's just kind of one word at a time. We're putting those letters into words, and we want students to be able to see them quickly. So Buzz has heard the word short. He can picture those letters for short quickly in his mind's eye, which means that he could read it quickly or even spell it quickly. On the other end, Natalie is using her concept imagery. So she is picturing what happens after the cowboy gets bucked off the bull at the rodeo. And she's going to picture that the rodeo clown comes in to save him. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about is that this picture is fairly detailed. It has lots of color, and we can see movement of the cowboy and even picture what the clown is doing and the bull. And so building that complete vivid image is how we help students hold on to particular vocabulary words, recall specific details from a sentence at a time to a couple sentences to a paragraph, or even whole stories. So here's my word. Everybody unmute. What word did you see? Don't all talk at once.
Lisp.
Great. If you change the order of those last two letters, what will it say now?
Flips.
So our word was Lisp. It is a nonsense word, and we can use real words or nonsense words to start building that symbol imagery. Now, one of the things to think about, we're assuming that the student already has that phonemic awareness for each of the common sounds of these letters. We're also assuming that the student can hold up to 5 letters. So that consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant at the end. And we want it to be that you can see that word for 3 seconds, kind of like a sight word, but you still have all those letters in your mind's eye. If you find a student can't do that, that is one of the things that we think about as far as intervention, because we don't want students relying on sounds completely. We want them to facilitate that visual processing so that they can hold on to words for long term. And so if we flip the order of those last 2 letters, it's going to say flips. So symptoms of weak symbol imagery. So if you have a Buzz that you've worked with before, they may have weaknesses in that word reading skills, sounding out words, or even that word recognition, because that phonemic awareness, phonological awareness isn't there. That orthographic awareness, memorizing sight words. I have them this week. I don't have them next week. Fast, accurate decoding. They may be reading, but it may be very belabored. Or that fast, accurate self-correcting. They're unable to determine their mistakes or figure out that they made mistakes when they're reading. We see students sometimes doing guessing rather than actually decoding when they're doing that contextual reading. And spelling most often is phonetic or sounds are missing. So you may see a student spelling the word reach as R-E-E-C-H or R-E-C-H if they're relying on those phonetics. Or you may see students that spell it R-A-S-H, which means they can't match at all. And so those underlying weaknesses, we go through teaching individual letter sounds and some of those common combinations so that students practice them and can develop these skills at the word level and then building that word recognition for sight words before we ever put it into context. On the opposite end of that spectrum that hardly gets a lot of talk is concept imagery. One of the things that I want you all to take away, which you probably already know, is reading accurately does not ensure comprehension. Show of hands. Agree, disagree, don't know.
100%.
What this could look like is, this is our story. So what did you see? What did those words make you picture? I hope you feel cheated. I didn't give you a whole lot of time. What color horse did you picture? And the reason I wanted to do that to you quickly is to simulate what that could look like for a student. So some of the things that we're thinking about for a vivid image is we want to focus on the main thing, but color and movement and even wear is what's happening. And so in this passage, we see a big black horse is running across the field. His head is held high as he's pounding across the ground. His thick mane blew wildly in the wind. So we... It was too fast. And I hope you, so when we're thinking about what a weakness in concept imagery looks like, that's what it's going to feel like for, it's that simulation of just that 5 seconds. Like that is a minimum of being able to read it quickly for students. But again, holding on to those complete details is not going to be automatic. So you may find a student can tell you it was a horse, the horse was running, but where may be missing. Those details of how the mane was waving or how it blew wildly or pounding, that idea of you could hear the sound of that horse, may be missing. And so when we think about weaknesses in concept imagery, language comes in, oral or written, but we're only getting parts or pieces. And so for a student like Natalie, that using recall or even translating to higher order thinking question is going to be even harder because I don't have a whole picture. How can I come up with the main idea? How might I determine what happens next or make those inferences? It's going to be hard for me to answer some of those questions or say it in my own words if I don't have a word bank. And then even then it may be difficult because I don't have a complete picture. And some of you may have a Natalie in your class right now, or you've worked with a Natalie before. When we're thinking about concept imagery, it is the foundation of learning and thinking. So not only do we want students to be making that picture when they're reading fiction, we want them to be able to do that even with nonfiction. So thinking about content areas in science, in social studies, even with other languages, we want students to be able to read that text or hear it and be able to take it into their own mind, what's happening, and that way they can talk about it. Otherwise, it's going to look like they're not understanding. They're going to reread it multiple times and get the same results, or they're going to work really hard, think they know it, and then their test still is a C or even failing. Concept imagery also is needed for following directions. Can you hold multiple oral directions? Do you catch all the directions when they're written down? Or do you do the first part or just the last part? Expressing language orally. So this one time, we went to that place. What was the name of that place? So if you see students who are trying to tell a story and they're using thing or stuff, or you remember, or it's like that word retrieval to tell that sequential story so that it makes sense, can be a sign of weakness in concept imagery. So that idea of they may know what they want to say, but getting that language out can be difficult. Expressing language in writing, giving more information or detailed or descriptive writing or sequential writing that makes sense. Grasping humor. If there is a weakness in that imagery process, if it's not slapstick, they may not be able to make that inference to make it funny. Teresa, go ahead. I'm sorry, I saw your hand raised. Did you have a question? So other things that you may find if a student has difficulty with comprehension is interpreting those social situations. What this has looked like is that students will participate in the group, but they are also hanging back or asking their friends what is going on. So it could appear like shyness, but not be shyness. Interpreting cause and effect, mental mapping, and just responding to a communicating world. And so we think of concept imagery as essential for students and adults to be successful. So one of the things that we think about, because we are in the business of remediation, if students have a weakness in one of these primary sensory cognitive functions, their trajectory, K-12, that 1 year of school to 1 year of game, doesn't match their peers. And so one of the things that we like to do is identify where those weaknesses are happening so that we can then provide instruction and stimulate that growth and practice to close that skills gap. Because we know the earlier that we can work with students to remediate, the better their trajectory is going to be. And so if lower grades, there is a lower expectation, but every year it grows. And so that intensive instruction, that targeted instruction to close that gap, whether it's a weakness in that phonological processing and symbol imagery or that concept imagery, is what we've looked to differentiate to help students. So imagery language processing, we think of language processing as a spectrum. We see students like Buzz that have trouble getting those words off the page. And so we would be focused on what I call those inner circles of the reading circles, or students like Natalie with that, what we call weak comprehension or concept imagery. And you probably have students that fall on both. Where do you think autism spectrum disorder would lie? For most students, I'm just thinking averages, this is not every student, but where might it lie? Yeah, comprehension.
Word recognition?
Yeah, so we're thinking about that meaning, that word recognition, interpreting social situations, being able to follow directions, all transitions, all lies there. We also see students with that auditory processing disorder often see that weakness in concept imagery. Now, ADHD could be anywhere on the scale. So depending on your student, you may have a student with ADHD that are struggling with just that decoding piece and comprehension. And part of that is because their brain, how they process language is different. And so making those connections, drawing that attention to that phonological awareness, simple imagery, and concept imagery is what's going to make them more independent, being accurate on the page, as well as getting that meaning from text. And not to say that we only work with students with diagnoses. You may see some weaknesses or even for any student, whether there's a diagnosis or not. So the focus, like I said today, is on that concept imagery piece. And so I wanted to share a little bit more about Natalie. Natalie is a student that actually went to receive instruction in one of our California centers. She was shy. She was 11-year-old, 6th grade. She could perform at high school level, sounding out words, that word recognition, and even spelling. Her oral vocabulary, just recognizing words and using them, was actually the 91st percentile. So above her peers, definitely a strength, but her reading comprehension and ability to follow directions were far below her potential. We start every student with a learning ability evaluation to piece apart those strengths and weaknesses when recommending instruction. As a teacher or parent, you can use your own work with your student to kind of figure out how easy this process is, or even doing some screeners. One of the things that her parents noticed was by 3rd grade, she wasn't completing assignments. She was no longer interested in reading, didn't want to go to school anymore, not motivated. One of the reasons that she finally came to Lindamood-Bells is because she started to be sick to avoid school. And so she also thought she was dumb. So what this looks like for students that have that high vocabulary and can read text, if they're not able to recall it for tests or for quizzes or to show what they know in class, it can definitely be devastating as far as to your self-esteem. Like, I'm putting this work in, I'm willing to do the work, but I'm not getting that same output. And so if you see that that's happening with a student that you work with or even your own, it's something to think about. So for Natalie, when we're looking at her evaluation, we used the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, which is a receptive measures receptive vocabulary. It's multiple choice. You get 4 pictures, starts relatively simple, show me the diamond, and there's 4 shapes, and then it gets progressively harder. So here we are, 86th percentile. That word attack, just sounding out words, sounding out nonsense words. Does she know the rules of English? Yes, 86th percentile. Wide range achievement test for word recognition. So basically, how well can she read sight words? She's at 87th percentile. So as far as those inner circles, yes, I can sound out words. Yes, I can recognize words. Yes, my accuracy is really high. Comprehension, opposite end of that spectrum, 2nd percentile. So when we're looking at the gray oral rating test, is a measure of open-ended tests, open-ended questions about stories that you read at the paragraph level, as well as a multiple choice. And she was unable to perform. So one of the things we recommended for sensory cognitive instruction, we actually focus on our visualizing and verbalizing program. And so we're focusing on, you've already got those details. You can read this word cat. Now we need to build that picture. Is it a house cat in the story, or is it a jungle cat? And that's just an example, but that's exactly what we want students to do. And the way we do that is by adjusting our language. So the first thing that you heard me even say, what do those words make you picture? And we want students really to be thinking about what they picture. So if I said, let's picture a pirate. What do you picture for a pirate? And you can list some details in the chat. I want you to pretend I don't know what a pirate is until you say it. And some of you are giving me things just like I'm picturing myself. When I picture a pirate, I'm always picturing a man. I'm always picturing a black hat and a patch and a sword and, a flowy shirt and high boots, high leather boots. And I don't know if that's really a pirate, but that's the pirate that I have in my head. Amber even pictured a blue shirt. I didn't picture blue. I'm always picturing kind of the tan. I think it's white, but now it's dirty because pirates don't shower. And you all may think that too, but that's what I was picturing in my mind. You were able to do that fairly quickly, fairly easily. There are some students and adults that cannot. My youngest student right now is 5. He doesn't have a diagnosis, but today I asked him to picture an alligator. And he told me, he said, the alligator is this big and it's green and it's asleep. So he's picturing green, which could match an alligator, but I've never seen an alligator quite this big. And so that idea that even some of those common nouns, alligator, panda, cat, dog, is maybe hard for students to actually verbalize. And that's where that idea of giving them imagery or building that foundation from imagery can be helpful. And how do we do that? We work one word at a time. So when we're thinking word imaging, sometimes we are modeling, sometimes we're giving synonyms, but we're always giving back to that imagery piece. Like, can you develop in your mind's eye? So thinking about this picture, what is Natalie picturing right now? Any ideas? Michelle, you're on top of this. It is a clown. And you're right. So one of the things, the reason that this is shaded like this, I want you to imagine one of your learners, however age, it's like we have a vague image of what it could look like. Oh, it's a person. I mean, he's probably got a hat. He's probably got a wig. I think his face has color. And that's what we don't want. We don't want vague. We don't want maybe. We don't know probably. Or, it's like that one we saw. So because even like that doesn't tell me exactly what the student is picturing. And so building that verbalization from imagery is how we build that detail. Here's another example. If we see a student that's still struggling with meaning, we're going to use that imagery. So the first thing we're going to do is actually show that picture. What are you picturing for a carriage? And we want it to match kind of where we are. If you've been watching the news lately, it talks all about background knowledge, that students have to be exposed to things before they can actually begin to understand it or recall it or make sense of it. And so in our Visualize and Verbalizing program, we start with pictures. You see it. Now tell me everything you see about this picture. So when I'm picturing this building, the picture of the carriage, I want to picture that it does have 4 wheels, that there's a seat for 2. Now, the one thing that's missing that we still need to build for the student is that this was pulled by horses. There's no motor here. And so we have to put that into that picture too. And then I'm going to take it away and ask the student, what did they just see? So this is a black and white picture, but details that we want students to picture. So I see a carriage. We're going to picture the size of it. We're going to picture color, if there's any shapes, or even picture how it moves, or when would we picture people using carriages. And so by putting those specific details, we're going to build that recall. And so they're not memorizing a definition as much as I can see it quickly. And I want you to think about it too. If you go to your cell phone and there's that selfie or picture of you out with friends, it takes you right back to that moment. And we want students to be thinking in that same way. They can make their own movie in their minds and be able to recall those details easily and quickly. So when we're thinking about a story, we start one sentence at a time. So we don't assume that it's there. We're going to ask them at each point. As you see those colored squares, that means that Natalie has already built 4 pictures for each of those sentences. And at the end of each sentence, we're going to prompt, what did that make you picture? What did you see? And we're going to start open-ended, which see how much can you give me? And if she's unable to provide very specific details, then we will prompt to, who did you see in this picture? What did you picture them doing? Where did you see them? So we can prompt to those very specific details to make that complete image in their mind's eye. And the way we do that is as we make that picture, then of course we have a clear picture that now we can apply to that higher order thinking as much as we can. Because it doesn't say in the story why the rodeo clown is the bravest. So she's got to see that he is protecting the cowboy by standing in front of the bull. So she can draw that conclusion. This is why he's the bravest. So what that looks like, I said some of these before in the Visualize and Verbalizing program, we call them structure words. And we're always starting with the main thing, the what or who you see. And then we're going to those specifics about that what or who, size, color, number, shape, where, movement. Mood is the mood of that person. So the rodeo clown is probably the mood, could be excited. The mood of that cowboy in the picture could totally be scared since he's trying to get out of the ring. Background, what do you picture for that arena? What do you see happening in that story? And perspective, how are you picturing that rodeo clown? Do you see him from the front? Are you picturing him from the side? Are you looking down? When do you see it happening? Is this daytime? Is this nighttime? Is this 1955? And what sound would there be in your picture? I imagine that bull charging is, I can hear those hooves as well as the sound, that bellowing that he would make. And some things to remember is that not every one of those details is going to be relevant, nor do you need to do them all to check that concept imagery for students. But that is a place to start. So here's a sample passage, and you all get to be my students again. I'm actually going to let you read it. And then we're going to answer those questions in chat. What imagery questions could you ask? So some of the things we're thinking about when we're working with students is, do they have that word recognition for what's happening in the story? And so my very first question is always going to be on the main thing. What are you picturing for a pink dolphin? Because most dolphins, if your picture is like mine, is not pink. And so we're going to start right there. And so Michelle, you're right. So we're going to start with that color, because we're also going to have to picture kind of how these dolphins are different. And so the other thing that you're going to be picturing is that poor eyesight and the hairs that they're using. So what are you picturing for that? But then we also need to picture where this is happening. If they're in muddy water, having good eyesight won't be helpful. But that's a conclusion that we need students to draw by making that clear picture. How many of you would have asked about South America? You can put in the chat or answer out, either one. Yeah, so one of the things to think about is the main thing is about these pink dolphins and how they're going to be different from other dolphins. And so picturing them in South America, it is something that the students can help, in their mind's eye, because we need to picture at least the climate that we're going to be picturing, right? Because I'm picturing, it typically pictures like jungle, that water is going to be muddy. And that's why, because we're picturing they can be in this kind of wild area. I said, but the biggest thing is, what do these dolphins look like, this muddy water, and how they're going to use to feel to move around in it. So what are some higher order thinking questions that you could ask? I hope that answers your question, Michelle. So when we're thinking higher order thinking, it's going to be main idea questions, conclusions, inferences, making predictions. And I always think about kind of negation. So how would you picture the dolphins feeling if they didn't have those hairs on their nose? Do you picture they would need those hairs if the water wasn't muddy? How might this be different if they lived in the ocean? Thank you so much for being my student. All right, so take a look. So one of the things that we always, like I said, can use is imagery that we provide. So if students don't have a clear picture of that pink dolphin, we can provide it. How many of you were picturing that long, thin snout? Does it match your picture? Yes or no? Nope. Yeah, so the picture that I have are that dolphins are very good leapers and very good swimmers. So it matches the picture on the right, as opposed to the picture on the left. And so making sure that we're building that clear picture for that we're picturing a different dolphin, these rare pink dolphins. And what does rare mean? We're not going to see a lot of them, and what that looks like. Yeah, most students will often pick the picture on the right and just change the color. And so even picturing that nose with hair, they're still seeing that it's very short with just a little bit of hair. And so having this picture back up is something to think about. Now, the other thing to think about, if you are in the classroom or working with students, this is a book. The picture is provided. And so we want students to actively verbalize what they see. Oh, so their snout is this big. So in real life, it's got to be about this long. And I picture, you can't see the hairs, but I'm picturing they're like right here, or pointing where they would see them in that picture. All right, so take a look. You're going to be my student again. What imagery questions could you ask in your elementary social studies class to help students? So our structural words are what, color, number, shape, size. So if you were teaching regions of the US and we want to picture the South versus the East versus the West, what questions might you ask? And so I love all these. You said distance, coastal, landlocked. So you're going to turn into an imagery question. What questions what states do you picture on the East Coast? What states do you picture on the West Coast? What do you picture to the north of the United States? What do you picture to the south? Does that make sense? Or what states do you see bordering Tennessee? Because that's where I am. All right, one more. Science. So take a look. Again, this is a picture that might be in a textbook. And the picture is labeled. This is probably going to be vocab that the students, oops, sorry. I had turned off all my sounds, and now I have another one. So for a student who is doing science, where the plant is labeled and they're going to be responsible for recalling these parts, the easiest way to do that is we want them to be able to recap this picture in their mind's eye. Can you memorize it top to bottom for this test? Yes, you can. If you want it long-term with understanding, you're going to have to use that imagery process. So some of the things to think about, we're picturing kind of where the soil line is, even though it's not here. You're picturing the difference of those lateral roots, primary roots, and that vascular tissue. And so having a picture of that vascular tissue going from roots all the way to the top of the plant will help students answer some of those critical thinking questions about what's happening. All right, so my time is running out. So what questions do you have for me? What are some things that you're thinking that you can take away or that you might use? Anybody?
Keanna, do you have any like little handouts or anything that we can link like with some of those prompts that you were going over for how to prompt the students or the children to start visualizing?
Yeah, I would be happy to share that. We give some examples about the very first thing that I want you to think about taking away. What do you see for that? How did you picture that happening? So what does that look like? So prompting to see and picture, what does that look like? We're wanting students to really think size, color, number, even without saying it. And so even with the picture book with our littles, you know, we can read that story before we take a look at that picture and have them describe it. And so I will share that with you, Michelle, after. And so you can think about it too. And you can even model your imagery for students. So when I picture my perfect beach vacation, I'm picturing white sand, I'm picturing palm trees, and I'm picturing a breeze and lemonade with an umbrella. And I hope that gave you a really good picture about my favorite vacation. So thank you very much. Amber, I'm sorry, you said helping them sound out words and allow them to breathe before trying. One of the, you know, today the focus was on comprehension, but one of the things to think about, even with thinking of a phonemic awareness and symbol imagery, we want students to be thinking, what did they just say? So if I have the word past and the student says pest, the very first thing is like, great job with that P. When you say past, or pest, what are you picturing after the P? So we still prompt to that picture first, not sound. And then they were going to say, we hope they're picturing, you know, E, pest. And then we're like, great, it would be an E. What do you have? And then checking against the word as they're picturing it. And again, and practicing it again later, that repetition and modeling as much as we can. So thank you.
One thing that I got from the training was I had gone through this verbalize training, but starting with the one object. So you had the dolphin. It's something I used to do with the students I worked with regularly or in a small group, was starting with that one object and really getting them to describe in detail that object. And then we started kind of changing the sentences so they could change in their mind, like, was a dolphin swimming or is the dolphin sleeping? And just so they could practice creating movement, because that seemed to help too. And then getting into the sound later, but we started with kind of the main thing and then added on.
And that's what we do too, is like the goal, like if you all picture dolphin, I mean, we will also picture common nouns like panda, or even a chicken or a duck. Like those are very common that students have seen, and ducks can be different colors. And so even talking about it, having the students compare in a small group of whether they're picturing a brown duck or a white duck can be different. So, and they could picture this duck standing in the grass versus flying, which duck can do, or floating on the water. And so having it in different stories, that flexing of imagery is also a sign of efficient concept imagery. There we go. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much. I feel like we could have you for hours because there's so much to talk about with that, but we really appreciate you coming. And if you, once we move to the librarian, if you maybe want to put your contact information down in the chat in case anybody wants to reach out to you with any questions, that would be fabulous. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen. We have our librarian coming in to share resources for our older readers. So let me go ahead and get that started for us. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Hello and happy Read Across America Week. My name is Sally Nye and I'm the librarian here in Burlington, Wisconsin. And I can't wait to share some books for older readers with you. Now, I am a kindergarten to 5th grade librarian then, so most of mine will be for 5th grade, and I'll try to throw in a couple higher ones for you. To start with, I know that our readers right now are having a little less stamina than usual, and they kind of get stuck in different places. So I've tried to find some books today that are going to fit in those categories that they're reading and try to expand them past it just a little bit. One of those places I know kids are reading is Harry Potter. My 5th graders right now are reading through the whole series and they're loving Harry Potter, which is fantastic. They're well written, they really bring them into the world, but once they finish, they go, but Mrs. Nye, what's next? So here's some books that they can go to once they finish Harry Potter. So if they have not picked up Nevermore yet, this is a fantastic series about Morgan Crow. In our beginning scene, we have her running for her life and people trying to hunt her down and kill her. She is saved and taken to a magic school over in a different realm. So it's very magical. We get that magical school, but she finds out she's more in that Slytherin camp than people would like. She's more powerful than people would like. And so she's not really fitting into that new world that she's discovering. And there's people trying to hone those powers of her. So there's 3 books in the series right now. It's a fantastic book to go to after Harry Potter, and kids really get excited about this one. Another series that I'm sure you've heard of is Percy Jackson. If they really like those mythology creatures from Harry Potter, if they really like that action, Percy Jackson is really fun. And Rick Riordan, you can't go wrong with any of his. For our older readers, Magnus Chase is a series of his that talks about the Norse gods. For readers a little bit younger, like 5th grade, the Red Pyramid series about the Egyptian gods he writes. And now he has the Rick Riordan Presents, because he feels like he's not comfortable going into some other cultures and using the appropriation of voice. He wants authentic authors that know those cultures and feel comfortable writing about it to present them themselves. So this is one of my favorite of the Rick Riordan Presents. Sal and Gabby Break the Universe. This is a really fun ride. It has a lot of magical moments and a lot of heart to it as well. So I can't wait to read the next one of these. Sal and Gabby is an excellent book. For kids that like Percy Jackson, there is a graphic novel version. There's also the Heroes of Olympus when we start mixing up the Roman and the Greek gods, which is my absolute favorite series of his. So a lot of great things to look at for Rick Riordan. And if they're interested in getting into more Chinese culture, Grace Lynn has the most fabulous chapter books. When the Sea Turned to Silver, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon. They are just beautiful stories that have a lot of culture, a lot of stories, a lot of dragons and mythology. Just very fantastical and beautiful. I didn't expect to love these as much as I did, and so I hope your children will love them as much. Another place to go, Fablehaven. Some kids turn up at their grandparents' backyard and they're going to stay there, and they realize that there's a lot more than they expected, and we meet a lot of very interesting creatures. My son actually is so hooked on Land of Stories. He likes it more than Harry Potter, and he's a diehard Harry Potter fan. This is diving into the books of fairy tales, so we get to meet all those fun fairy tale characters in the Land of Stories. And they just started making some graphic novels of these as well, if your kids like those. So be sure to check out all those different fantasy. For our older readers, dystopian is a very good handoff as well. At this library, I don't have Divergent, Hunger Games, Maze Runner, all those great books that the kids love to go to in that dystopian world. That leads me to another category that's excellent for our older readers. They love reading a book and having a payoff of a movie. So my middle son, is not as big of a reader as my other two. And so I always tell him, if you finish a book, we can watch the movie. So he just finished Maze Runner, so he got to watch the movie. He's working through the Hunger Games series. The Benedict Society just has a TV show that came out, so he's starting to work through this one a little bit so we can watch the TV show. And it's a really quirky one, so if your kids like kind of mysterious, quirky books, this is a fun one to go to. A Wrinkle in Time just had the movie come out. This is the graphic novel adaptation if your kids really have a hard time with science fiction. I just read the Dune graphic novel as well, and that was fantastic for your older readers. Really, really fantastic. Ella Enchanted is a fun story, and anything by Gail Carson Levine. I really went through a phase of hers a while back too. I loved them. And Neil Gaiman has some really fantastic things. The Coraline is a really fun one to watch. The Graveyard Book doesn't have a movie, but it is a fabulous story in itself. And the one I'm most excited about, they're making the TV series right now, Lockwood and Company. I am obsessed with these books. It happens in the future in England, and there's a problem where ghosts are rising, and only kids can see them, adults cannot. So they become the agents. They have to go figure out why the ghosts are popping up in different places. So this TV series is being worked on right now, and I can't wait to watch it. It is fabulous. And so with that, another book that our kids do get obsessed with is Wonder, which does have an absolutely wonderful movie to go with it. If kids love books like Wonder, where can they go to next after they read it? There's a whole great section in our libraries. Fish in a Tree is about a girl who cannot read, and she's fooled every teacher she's had, except for the one she presently has, and he kind of figures out something is going on. Out of My Mind, I actually heard is just being turned into a movie, is fantastic. It's about a girl who's so severely disabled, she has spasms, she can't communicate, she can't talk, and as a result, she's treated as if she's not very smart, where she really is a genius. And she learns to find a voice and finds a way to learn to communicate in this book. It's fabulous. One of my new favorites was Wink. Just the description of this one. He always wanted to fit in, but when he's diagnosed with a rare eye cancer, he's suddenly the standout cancer kid of the 7th grade. Now he has to deal with eye goo, weird hats, a squinting eye, and disappearing friends, bullies, and the threat of losing his eyesight. It's kind of Diary of a Wimpy Kid meets a more serious topic. It's a really fabulous book. And the last one I just finished was absolutely fabulous as well. It's Gordon Corman, whose Restart is a really great book. But this one is where a kid draws a swastika on the wall of their school, and they start to learn like why that's bad and the whole history of it and why bullying is a bad thing. So some really fabulous things. One more thing I want to mention is don't forget about picture books for your older readers. There are some fabulous picture books out there. I think I mentioned this one for our early readers. I read this to some high schoolers to talk about storytelling not so long ago, and they absolutely love this story, I Want My Hat Back. And it's very surprising and a little dark, so it's a lot of fun to read. Our older readers really love the storytelling of Chris Van Allsburg as well. A lot of them have that tie to Jumanji for the movie, and The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi is a fabulous storytelling. So be sure to look for some of those really fun, rich stories of the picture books that we have. As you go into those storybooks as well, there's some really great history you can teach with picture books. the wildest race ever. Talks about the first Olympic marathon, and people are hitching rides on cars. It's crazy. It's a really crazy race. It's a really fun history to look at. Did you know that baseballs didn't work right away? They had to figure out how to make them so they would work properly. So there's a guy that figured out how to use some certain type of mud to make the balls work. And one of the new Caldecott winners and the Coretta Scott King Award winners, Unspeakable, talks about the Tulsa Race Massacre, and in an easier way to understand and for kids to comprehend and to think about. So there's some really big topics as well. One of the kids' favorites to look at is The Man Who Walked Between the Towers, and just talking about this man who was crazy enough to put out this tightrope and walk between them, and how they aren't there anymore. And it actually was made into a movie itself. This is a fantastic book to look at. Now, we know that sometimes kids don't want to listen to our recommendations. That's why I love Flipgrid. Flipgrid is a great place for kids to go to make recommendations for each other, especially our older readers. So it kind of looks like this. And with that, I can click on any of these recommendations and I can learn more about it. So I can see Dahlia here.
Hi, I'm Dahlia, and I recommend Making Friends. It's about a girl named Daniel that has a magic sketchbook, and she uses it to create a friend for herself named Madison.
All right, and then it just kind of cycles them through the different ones. So next we can see Adams. So that is one place to go where you can have kids recommend for each other. It's really easy to set up, and all they have to do is click to record and they are ready to go. I hope you found some resources to help you out today. I hope you have a very happy Read Across America Day. And if you would like another look at some of those resources, check the site out, bit.ly 35FWMSS.
Okay, that is everything we have for today. It is just 4 o'clock, so our session is over.
Count this verbal.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next year during our session. Have a great day.